Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 22nd installment of Encyclopedia Hermetica, A Big History. Today we're going to be talking about history. It's been a while. So let's do that. I'm with Mitch and Brett, and we're going to talk about predominantly Greek history and the Peloponnesian War. So what do you have to say?
Great war. What a great war.
A great war, yeah?
Yeah. Deeds and words.
That's Mitch, by the way. Let's just sort this voice thing out first. I'm Brett.
And I'm Mitch.
Yeah, his voice is lower, and if you don't recognize Dan's, well,
You're
listen to more of his podcast. You have 21 episodes to catch up on.
Yeah. So, we kind of left off the last time we met up, and we were talking about the Persian War, and so the Peloponnesian War was kind of an outgrowth of this process.
Well, it certainly stemmed from it. You can't really talk about where one came from without the prior war. Mostly because of the leagues set up. The defense leagues against the Persians were really an impetus for how Greece was divided. The major one was the Delian League, which was really formed 478, so not long after the end of the Persian Wars, because the Athenians really expected more Persian invasions. The Delian League was quote-unquote Athens and their allies, so that's really excluding Sparta and all their allies, which is what we come to know as the Peloponnesian League, and that was the antithesis to Athens during the whole Peloponnesian War.
Right, so we have on the one hand the Delian League, and on the other hand the Peloponnesian League.
Yeah.
With Sparta at the head of the Peloponnesian League, and Athens at the head of the
You know what?
Delian
It's
League.
worth noting here that the Delian League might be a bit of a misnomer, and I kind of like the idea of calling it Athens and her allies, because you can always see where it's a very unequal relationship when it's name and the unnamed.
Yeah.
Rome and her allies.
Oh, that's it, right? After this, especially, we see Athens rise to empire.
Right.
And
This is the shift to a state of de
it's
facto
huge.
empire.
It's Athens and her allies, but it's Athens and everyone Athens controls in a more realistic sense. They're demanding tribute and all sorts of things. But still very early on, it wasn't as solid, and it was, as quoted, Athens and her allies.
They didn't necessarily demand tribute at first, and the allies foolishly fell into a trap.
Yes.
You had to provide a trireme.
It was a contribution of some sort.
Yeah, a trireme or triremes, ships, or tribute. And the allies thought it was easier just to pay tribute than their human resources.
Yeah.
And in the end, this proved a bad thing, because now the Athenians were getting paid to have the only significant military force. So the allies, by withdrawing, only withdrew funds that the Athenians had the military force to come exact.
Yeah.
So they foolishly walked into that one.
Yeah, I think part of the trick, too, was that initially it was contributions to the League, and I guess, in some sense, they would have known it was a contribution to Athens, but the treasury was on Delos, super pan-Hellenic.
I just say this because I wonder what the League would have come out like if more states wanted to contribute military resources. Would Athenians have had this imperial bend towards them if they didn't have the significant military muscle all to themselves? And it's just historical contingency.
Yeah.
They very easily could have just decided, we'll send a ship. We want to spend money on stuff at home.
Looks like someone's got a case of the would-haves.
Yeah.
Well, no.
The would-haves
you can't
and the
really
would-nots.
explore that direction too far, but it's always worth noting that history is not deterministic.
Of course, it's always fun to go down those avenues.
And quantum theory has made this true.
And James Joyce.
Oh, good old James
A great prophet.
All right. Oh, anyway, so back to how we have Greece and states. So really, it's Athens and her allies, and Sparta and her allies. And we mentioned the contributions, so ships or money. And initially, this all went to either the Athenian navy or the treasure on Delos, which would later be moved to Athens. But at this time, we have Cimon, the leader of Athens, who was extremely pro-Spartan.
Sometimes pronounced Simon.
Yeah, sometimes pronounced Simon.
Mm-hmm.
Sparta actually has a crisis a number of years after the end of the Persian Wars in the late 460s, 464, 461. We have the earthquake and the revolt of the Messenians, which is a big thing. I mean...
Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
All right, so
we've talked about the Messenians
let's
at length as a sort of
talk about
slave
the event of
subclass.
the earthquake. Yeah.
Okay, well, what do we know about the earthquake?
Well, it happened in what year?
464.
And it wiped out a huge chunk of the both Helot and Spartan population.
Yeah, which is always an issue for the Spartans, to lose their core citizen body.
Right.
It has a huge effect
on their workforce.
Well, the loss of the citizen body is what leads to basically the end of effective Sparta in another century by Leuctra. So, but yeah, not only that, but their workforce, the Helots, they require these to get by on daily life to support that citizen body. So once you have them revolting, they refuse to work. What's Sparta going to do? They're severely outnumbered, as I'm sure you've talked about. Their supplies are not coming in.
These are people who do not know how to work the soil.
No, not at all. So
they're not allowed to know.
Sparta's recourse at the time is to ask Athens for help, and we have Cimon in government, and he's pro-Spartan. So around 462, we have the call, and Athens responds. But by the time Athens responds, Sparta refuses their help.
Fearing that the democratic state will have some
sort of detrimental effect, having an army of Athenians in the Peloponnese. They change their mind. Eventually the revolt is put down. They take refuge in Mount Idumea. Ithome.
But yeah,
Ithome.
The slight or the dishonor done to the Athenian army, though, was not received well by the lower classes.
No.
And populist leaders would play that popular rage up to further their own.
Yeah, Cimon's reputation takes a huge hit because of this, and that's essentially an end of some sort of pro-Spartan government
and
in
good
Athens.
relations.
And things really go down from here. But it's at this time we can start talking about Pericles and the rise of Pericles and the transformation to empire. Pericles, one of the most famous Athenian statesmen, an Alcmaeonid, so he's of good blood.
Still very aristocratic.
Very aristocratic.
People take this to, it gets a little bit more lower class oriented by the time of the demagogues, as they're called.
Yeah.
But it's still very aristocratic then. The demagogues are noble birth.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of focus in history and general historiography about this particular character. He's kind of the exemplary great man figure.
Oh yeah, Squidface.
Yeah.
Squidface.
Well, he has the helmet up like that.
Oh, yeah.
He has the helmet above his head, so he just has this really tall head.
Well, you see that for everybody, right? You see
an alien?
Shows of Roman history. What is it? In Spartacus, they've got this whole line of statues, and one of them is very clearly the famous Pericles, but it's named
Old Squidhead, yeah.
Yeah, it's a super recognizable statue. Anyone who's ever seen a statue
just
of him
Google image search
everywhere.
Pericles statue, and if it has a helmet, that's Squidhead. You'll see it.
Well, Pericles, he's known as being one of the great statesmen.
Citation Robert Porter, by the way.
Yeah, Robert Porter.
That's the guy who will tell you he's Squidhead. Good art historian.
Known for what are reported to be his speeches in Thucydides, the famous
the funeral
oration.
I'll never encourage anyone not to read something except for this. And, modern fiction.
This is the Greek student's nightmare.
I had 3 Greek classes the term we had to hit this in the 300 level 1, so...
I can proudly say that I have avoided it at all costs. I've avoided it like the plague.
Yeah.
It makes sense on the first read over. It kind of I can see where he's going, but when you try to put the pieces together, it's like he scrambled together 3 jigsaw puzzles and then took out 2/3 of the pieces.
Yeah.
At random. So some of them fit, but some of them have nothing they fit to, but none of them will ever fit together, and there's some things this sentence is just a mess. Before people were having problems with the archaic poets, people were having more problems with Thucydides.
Well, Thucydides couldn't be easily read only 150, 200 years after he wrote.
Yeah.
So in the Hellenistic period, scholars were having a difficult time reading Thucydides
Already.
Yeah, and this is...
And they're born into that language.
Yeah, they're...
Yeah, if you ever read the Prophecy of Cassandra, you can see just how crazy these people can get with their knowledge of obscure words and their language and grammar. These people had a problem with Thucydides.
As is tradition.
A good Cambridge, not a good one, I think it's one of the poor Cambridge commentaries I used, but a Cambridge commentary nonetheless kept saying perhaps. And it's the only time...
word.
And you know, this is the thing. Despite the fact that I didn't mind it elsewhere, but I thought it was really sparse, the problem with it was, as all the reviews of it in academic journals pointed out, this guy really just focused on the funeral oration, just kind of did, some lip service to all the other stuff. And it was still a mess. And he was renowned for this job. So, not to insult the man, it's just, he chose a difficult subject matter.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Pericles from the top then.
All right. So Pericles comes to power. I believe it's in the mid-450s, or early 450s. One of his big things is his reforms. He makes a ton, and like I said, they really were contributes to Athens becoming an empire. I mean, there's no point in talking about all the reforms, but they're not limited to things like increase in naval power, emphasis on controlling the seas. That's, I've always seen at least Athens as the thalassocracy, that word that they always get applied.
Yeah, sea power.
Yeah. And then the other famous reforms, just as another example, are the building of the Acropolis. That started in 447, so the Periclean building program, things like the Propylaea, the Parthenon, the Temple of Athena Nike.
This is a great example of early monuments that are held sacred but are quickly forgotten. So usually when there's someone who dies. If you have Breakfast of Champions I was talking about earlier, so there's a monument to someone who dies in the town, but everyone's forgotten about it a generation later. But they promised after the sacking of the Acropolis by the Persians that they would not rebuild on it, it would stand as a memorial.
Right.
But a couple generations later they have a whole lot more money and it's not as traumatic in their memory.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost comparable. The way that Pericles goes about rebuilding Athens as this center for renowned architecture and their nice buildings is almost comparable to the later example of Emperor Augustus and his beautification, making the city of Rome marble.
Without rendering it broke like Nero.
It's kind of like a civic pride thing, I think, in part. But the treasury at Delos of the Delian League had been transferred to Athens. So they did have an influx of huge amounts of cash from all their allies' contributions.
And the silver mines.
Yeah, and the Laurian silver mines that had been founded 50-ish years before.
They found a new vein, didn't they?
They may have, yeah.
I think they found a new vein just... in the Periclean period, they found a new vein in the mines.
Yeah, so Athens was very wealthy. They had the money to outfit huge numbers of ships. They could rebuild their city and build it better than before. They were ready to party. So the other big reform that Pericles is known for concerning the naval power is the rowers of the fleet, the thetes. They were paying people to row in the fleet, which was huge.
Right. Slavery in rowing is largely a Hollywood myth.
Yeah.
Something that happened in the early modern period.
Prior to this, we were looking at more as a
do you really want to trust the backbone of your ship to be rowed by people who have no investment in their life?
Mm-hmm.
If they're men, there's a good chance that that they live in just hate of their life.
Yeah.
They can kill their masters by doing nothing.
Yeah. Oh, and a citizen body of rowers. A lot of jacked people.
In the sequel to 300, I think they had slaves rowing for the Persians.
Oh, did
they? Would have had Phoenicians.
Yeah.
It would have been highly paid, well-respected Phoenician mercenaries.
We'll be able to see something coming out of that soon enough by the time we get closer to the end in Spartan naval development, because they rely on the Persians. But with the Athenians, I mean, it was huge because you had the upper-class hoplites who could afford the armor, who could afford to fight on the field, but you had all these poor thetes, lower-class Athenians who couldn't do anything, and they rowed out of civic duty. But now they were being paid for what they could do, 2 or 3 obols a day, maybe only 1. I'm not sure of the exact cost, but I know it was lower than the Spartans paid for later to their mercenary rowers. But it was a huge thing to get everyone in the city involved. So Pericles made a lot of important changes that would affect what would happen in the Peloponnesian Wars. And that really brings us down to the first phase of the war, called the ArcAdamian War, 431 to 421.
Named after
King Archidamus of Sparta, who was initially reluctant. He was one of the Spartans who didn't want to go to war with Athens, but obviously he didn't win out.
But I think it's worth talking about, just when we talk about Pericles and the rowers, and just to tie in the Periclean reforms, one of the big ones is limiting citizen body for a very, just narrowing down completely who's a citizen. They have to be both mothers and fathers' side and all that. And I think a big part of why that came to be is citizens were paid to be judges. Citizens were paid to be rowers. They wanted to keep the resources contained within a smaller body.
Yeah.
And there's...
Who's a citizen, who's a medic.
Yeah, so they didn't want to share... They didn't want to extend the enfranchisement to people who would take away the... who would dilute the wealth that's flowing in.
Not really so much, the xenophobia you get out of so many Greek states, it's not really the case here, probably. With most states, it's
pretty bad.
Yeah.
A lot of medics would be second or third generation Attic speaking.
But that's not the primary driving cause here, is what Brett's saying, really. It's more, how do we contain our money? How do we keep our resources
At
to
Christmas,
Athenians?
I heard a family member talking about, why are we bringing in all these Syrians when people here need work? And that is very much the mentality.
Yeah, it's very much so.
They could be from anywhere, or they could do anything. We have problems enough. Why are we spending money on them? And it's just a very insular-minded.
Yeah, but I think I'm reminded of the foundation story of the Metron in Athens. Mm-hmm. It was built over top of a pit where they threw in a priest of Kabyle, who just wandered in and was proselytizing, and they just took her and threw her into a hole, and then they got a plague soon after, and then they were like, okay, we're sorry.
We're sorry.
We'll build this giant temple to the Phrygian goddess.
You know what? You might be interested in, this is a side note, Andrew Noakes, do you know him? Did you ever meet him? No, he's doing an MA now. He did his whole undergrad too, but he's
very intelligent.
The reception of Dionysic cults in Athens
cool.
is what he's doing. Yeah, so just as a side note, you might want to look out for that.
Yeah, very interested.
So back to the ArcAdamian War.
Yep.
Thucydides talks about it, and actually in his first book, when he's given all his reasons for writing and all that, he describes the war as inevitable because of the rising power of Athens and the fear it caused in Sparta. So Thucydides' perspective on the whole war is that it was going to happen no matter what. It was inescapable. And it did?
It did, but it's easy to say that your predictions are correct after the fact.
What can you really call it a prediction? It's more of a...
You could easily have said that the Cuban Missile Crisis would have resulted in war, too.
That's fair.
I think there are plenty of times where where stupid shit happens and leads to war. We're like, I didn't see that coming. And other times where everyone sees war coming and it's averted.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, going back to it, we had a lot of clashes between Athens and Spartan allies. The major one's Corinth. Corinth wasn't happy that Athens was allying with its colony at Corcyra. That pissed them off a little. We had ultimatums to Potidæa, and probably more famously towards this end is the trade sanctions against Megara. Athens wouldn't trade with them, which meant there was a huge economic upset in that area of Greece, which upset Corinth as an ally of Megara as well, which led to a lot of tension. The Greeks, or the Athenians and the Spartans, rather, had signed a 50-year peace, or not too long after this. Do you remember when the 50-year peace was?
I think it was something like...
it's in the it was 445.
Yeah, it was early to mid-40s, because I remember it didn't even last 2 decades.
Yeah. So the Spartans and the Athenians had formed a 50-year peace on the basis of negotiation instead of conflict for the near future. Obviously, this doesn't last too long. 15 years later, we have the outbreak of the ArcAdamian War. Pericles refuses to give up the empire, and this is what Sparta's demanding, that Athens stop controlling everything, Athens stop being in charge, give up your league.
There's one thing I found in his speech, though, and I think it's book one of Thucydides, where he defends it. And the argument is whether or not we've come upon this empire justly, it would be dangerous to let it go.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. The present doesn't exist in a vacuum here.
Yeah.
So it's no longer a question of whether or not this empire is legitimate. If we dissolve all this now, we strip ourselves bare in a world that hates us.
Yeah, lots of problems for Athens, and I mean they're top of their high pedestal, and like Thucydides said, Sparta's afraid. I mean, Sparta's always been renowned as a great military force, but what sway do they really have? If you look at the Athenian Empire relative to what Sparta was the hegemon over, I mean, you have the Peloponnese. A couple of islands probably, but the majority of Ionia...
Limited resources.
Yeah, limited resources, especially relative to Athens, who has the huge...
And Sparta's no naval power, which is kind of...
Not at all.
Corinth is, though.
Yes.
Corinth is a naval power, but, I mean, with Sparta at the core, Sparta probably barely has a boat to its name.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Athens' allies couldn't really throw any boats towards the cause, but Sparta did have a very powerful alliance with Corinth, and when their interests were won, or so it seemed to them, they performed quite well, despite, I think, many early defeats by the Athenians. Like the Athenians defeated the Corinthians.
I think if you look at it that way too, though, although we can't say directly that Athenian allies were contributing ships, they had ships their own. And when Athens controls all the Cyclades and the entire Ionian coast, Athens' naval power is massive compared to Corinth on their own, and then with their allies, it's...
Oh, I know.
But I mean, the point, like a lot of the Peloponnesian War is huge on naval warfare and the ability to get across the Mediterranean.
Yeah, the Athenians' ability to just vex the Spartans by just departing, just disembarking and sacking a town and heading back to sea. That was a huge factor. That whole war I see as the Athenians snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It was theirs.
About the Sicilian expedition?
Oh, no, well...
Not necessarily, but I mean, we'll get to an example soon of an Athenian raid into Peloponnese. That's one of the more famous ones.
The Sphacteria?
Yeah, Sphacteria.
Okay. I love that one. Thucydides writes it quite well, and I don't say that often.
So as we were, Pericles refuses to give up the empire, and his response is to prepare Athens for a defensive war. The famous statement he makes is to make Athens an island.
Yes.
The Athenians build the walls around the city and then the long walls to the Piraea. Mm-hmm. So Athens effectively...
Piraea being the port.
The port of Athens, so it effectively becomes an island. The long walls aren't that tall, but they don't need to be that tall. I think what most people think when they hear wall is they think something that's like 16 feet high with, thinking like medieval castles.
If you have 8 feet of like just brick.
But we're talking even like 4 or 5 feet. That's what the long walls, about 5 kilometer stretch of walls from the city of Athens to its port.
Well, yeah, because as long as you can control the terms of, if you're within the walls, they have to scale them. You're making them throw lives away, scaling the walls.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the point. The walls don't need to be high to be effective, but I just kind of like a perspective point is that we're not talking like medieval castle walls.
We're not talking Great Wall of China.
We're talking like
today.
Sheep pasture.
By the way, Great Wall of China is, well, there are many stages it went through.
Yeah.
It didn't start as big as it is today.
Of course not.
So,
the Mongolians had to hack at it first.
Yeah, they had to keep getting stronger against those Mongolians. They were going to protect their shitty walls.
Athens and their walls. But then disaster. We have the plague of 430. I'm sure Brett's going to want to talk about the plague narration a little bit in Thucydides.
Oh, I forget all the words he uses. That is the most tedious vocabulary section. Oh, yeah. Kratos diachroia. Strong...
strong flow through.
No, akratos. Akratos.
Oh.
It's uncontrollable.
Without power.
Yeah. Uncontrollable diarrhea.
Yeah, but I mean the plague.
That's why it's awesome.
The plague had a huge effect on the Athenian citizenry.
So what do we know about the plague? When did it hit? And
430 is when we get it started.
Yeah.
Where did it come from?
Probably the Black Sea.
Probably the Black Sea. The trader ships took grain.
Damn Romanians and Ukrainians.
Yeah. So
you can see why there's a bit in agrarian culture, though, a real hatred towards commerce when you think about where the only source of plague is going to be for, usually, right?
Mm.
I mean, it's really not that arbitrary to commerce, like the hatred towards commerce, because this is where plagues come from.
Yeah.
It's usually rats that accompany trade vessels of some sort.
That's where they suspect the
and
big
they've got
plagues.
fleas on them or whatever, or bacteria of some sort.
But I mean,
or a trader gets some lice.
That too. Traders always, they're going from one area to another and carrying all these germs.
There was
and they're notorious for sleeping with prostitutes and.
Well, everyone is.
Yeah, of course.
But I forget. Is syphilis has it been argued, but is now being rethought, or is it now just...
For which?
I forget which way it goes.
This plague?
Syphilis is a New World disease, for example.
Oh. Mm.
I've heard that. But I can't comment on it right now.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to get there eventually.
Yeah, so...
Stay tuned for episode 421.
Syphilis.
Syphilis,
So,
you drive me crazy.
So for those who don't know, Athens had a huge grain trade around the Black Sea, especially the eastern coast, but all around really. They had what are they called? There's 3 islands on the way towards the Hellespont that the Athenians almost always controlled, where they would stop on their way.
Emporiums?
Yeah, it's Skyros, Lemnos, and Imbros, not necessarily in that order, but they were a vital part of Athenian trade. And I mean, in the ancient world, grain was a huge deal. It's part of the reason they took on the Sicilian expedition. It's why they maintained relationships with Egypt and Cyrene, that area. And the Black Sea was notorious for its grain production. So
the Egyptian expedition would have been very influenced by trying to get some of that sweet
grain supply.
At Nile Delta.
This is where the ships are going and coming back, and where they might have picked up the plague. So the plague was devastating. A huge portion of Athenian manpower was lost.
What was it, like a quarter or a third of the citizen body?
A third of the citizen body was dead in that year.
Oh, it's like the plague, too.
Yeah, a huge effect. They don't know what the plague was still. I mean, based on Thucydides' narration of it and what was around, they've tried testing it. They actually have bones from the plague pits in Athens, but they've only let veterinarians test the teeth. They won't let actual osteologists.
Well, here's the problem with the plagues. It's a natural selection thing. Yeah. Usually viruses that evolved to be so deadly don't live long.
Yeah.
They often go extinct.
They kill themselves out. But they do think the leading theory for what the plague was at this time is typhoid.
Yeah.
They think it was typhoid. I mean, they can't say for any...
So there's no description of, like, swollen glands.
Oh, there's all that.
Like
there is...
very clear...
Thucydides does a top-to-bottom, quite literally description.
So it could be
had
the bubonic plague.
Yeah, it could be. We don't know for sure.
No, he did not describe the, like, that type of black welts.
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Oh, no, not that.
He talked about the fever, the thirst.
There's
thirst,
a great
very
point.
Profound thirst.
People would dive into the city's fountains to drink.
Because they were feeling like they were burning
up. They were burning up.
There were corpses in the wells.
Yeah, which obviously only served to further spread it. And in a city that's so contained within the walls, that's going to make it that much worse. Thucydides himself had the plague and he survived it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean,
he's a great resource for that alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it pays to have money.
But huge mystery there.
Pericles died of the plague.
Pericles dies in 429 after the plague breaks out. They don't know directly whether or not it was the plague that did it, but Pericles does die, and it would seem, because of the circumstances, that he succumbed to the plague. So Pericles is now dead, and this is where, as Brett mentioned earlier, we have the period of the demagogues. Our lovely Cleon.
I think if you look at some of his deeds and not how Thucydides frames him, we are getting a bit of a maligned view of the guy.
I mean, Thucydides
So tell us about these power to the people type folks.
God forbid they should come back.
I mean, we get in this period of really, maybe describe it as popular rule. I think that's
Populist
yes. rules. Cleon himself, he was still an aristocrat.
Yeah.
They usually are.
Yeah.
He's not of the same stock as Pericles as Alcibiades is. Is Alcibiades not related to?
Alcibiades is an Achaemenid as well, but we'll get to him.
All right, I'm just saying that. I'm just trying to point out like the Bush family thing going on.
You're right. They're heavy interrelation. I mean, they all too are related back to.
So the model democracy.
Right. Yeah.
Dynasties are very vital to Athens' political life.
So, but Cleon, one of the first things we hear about is the Mytilene affair, 428-7. So where we get Athens in a revolt with one of their allies, Mytilene. They send out ships to kill them all, enslave them. They call them back. They decide, we'll just kill 1,000 people, and that's where we'll stop for today.
Sweet mercy.
I mean, from that, he kind of gets the picture of brutality, but like Brett said, that's
and
really...
fickleness.
Fickleness.
The fickleness of the mob is really a thing.
Yeah.
Thucydides.
Thucydides doesn't like Cleon, though.
The amazing thing, though, is his numbers that he provides in his accounts match up with inscriptions.
Yeah.
We'll get to this later. But.
Yeah, so... and as we mentioned before, we're coming to a good little episode of Athenian raiding. Athens takes Pylos, which is on the west coast of the Peloponnese. And this is where we get Sphacteria. A number of Spartans ended up on the island just across from Pylos, which is Sphacteria. They get trapped there. The Athenians won't let them go. They're starving to death. They're dying of thirst. They eventually surrender, which is a huge deal. The Spartans have never surrendered up to this point.
It's easier to die of a spear wound than it is from hunger.
Yeah. So
anything can be borne briefly.
What happens with these Spartans is the Athenians capture them, imprison them, and then they trade them with Sparta for some prisoners that the Spartans have of theirs. Obviously, these Spartans didn't last too long at home. I think one of them committed suicide. I might be thinking of another episode, though. But in any case, they were the Spartans who surrendered.
And the Spartans wanted them back.
Yeah, the Spartans wanted them back, so it not only shows that the Spartans are more conscious of their citizen body,
their limitations
of citizen body, but B, it also showed that Spartans could surrender, which is a huge moral blow for Sparta, but kind of a huge moral victory for everyone against Sparta. We can beat this quote unquote unbeatable.
Yes, this invincible army is.
Yeah.
It's really funny too. At Sphacteria, the initial conflict where they all met, the Athenians performed better against the Spartan infantry.
Yeah.
And the Corinthians, who were supporting the Spartans, bested the Athenian navy at the outside of the battle. So Thucydides was pointing out the irony of
the naval power losing
and winning on land.
Losing at sea and winning on land.
Yeah. So, I mean, that happens.
I know, it's always appreciable when Thucydides tries to add a little charm to his dry, droll... Of Greek historians, it's the most like reading Cormac McCarthy. Just the road of history.
So, a year later, 424, we have the loss of Amphipolis. So we see a change in Spartan strategy from attacking Athens directly to attacking the periphery.
Who led the attack on Amphipolis?
Brasidas.
Thucydides thought very highly of him, did he not?
He did, but for those who don't know, Amphipolis is in the north, near to Macedonia, in what would have been closer to Thrace at the time.
It's in the little... it's in the little hand.
They can't see the map, right?
Oh yeah, I know. But I was just trying to make sure, but it's near the little hand that's...
if I can remember what it's called, it's something.
The Carinese?
Carinese, near the Carinese.
The hand island. It's the hand island.
So, Amphipolis is over a river, the split city, the two-part city. And it's very famous for its wood resources, which Athens obviously needs to maintain a strong navy. They need good wood. So they hold on to Amphipolis as one of their extremely important outposts. And Brasidas great Spartan general who Thucydides loved, maybe only because Brasidas screwed with Cleon so much, and Thucydides hated Cleon. But he was a very competent commander. Also very important to note here is that Thucydides was the commander in charge of Amphipolis for the Athenians.
Well, I think this is very important, because in your history, when you get bested by a man taking the, let's say, the B team, very far out of friendly territory, where your mobility should be able to hinder him and your allies in the area, when you lose an important strategic city to the B team, are you getting beaten by a strong leader of the B team or an idiotic leader of the B team? Brasidas died, by the way, there, so there's no way any future deeds can prove or disprove your narrative. So you got beaten by the best.
In any case, Thucydides lost Amphipolis for the Athenians, and at that time he also lost his Athenianness. He was exiled for his failure to defend Amphipolis from the Spartans. Yeah, for 10 years. And this is probably when he wrote his history in his exile.
The first half, at the very least.
The first half. Well, whatever exists of it. So this brings us down to the end of the 420s. 421, we have the Peace of Nicias. Nicias is another new member on the scene of the Athenian democracy.
Very conservative.
Conservative guy, very traditional.
Well-born, of good birth.
Of course.
As most good conservatives
as God's intended.
Right.
So Nicias brokers a peace with Sparta. It's supposed to be a 30-year peace. Unfortunately, it lasts around 6.
That means it still ended 24 years too short. The other one
15. Yeah.
The other one was 35 years too short.
Better record for sure. But anyway,
but it's a smaller percentage of it. So
the huge problem with the Peace of Nicias is that it solved nothing. It was basically just
status quo antebellum.
Yeah. There was still a lot of anger amongst Sparta's allies. Just nothing was fixed by it. It was just a Band-Aid.
It was really just restore...
It was just reloading your gun.
Restore...
It was just pretty much... There might be a couple exceptions, but as far as I know, it was just how things were before the war.
Yeah.
So, that's... maybe calmer heads would prevail next time. Who knows?
And the other problem with the Peace of Nicias is that the terms never were fully implemented. For example, Amphipolis was never resolved. It remained out of Athens' hands for a while.
Oh, yeah.
So this obviously left a lot of tension. And enter stage left Alcibiades, one of the most interesting and strange people of this period.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the most brilliant and capable solipsists history has known.
Gotta love Alcibiades.
Alcibiades.
Well, as long as you accept that, that he's a solipsist.
Yeah.
He was like a magical, interesting chameleon man. He shows up
everywhere
around this time. He's everywhere for the last 2 decades of the 4th century, and then he's gone again. So Alcibiades takes place the Melian affair.
Oh, Milos.
He does not. Alright, so in 416, Athens is having some trouble with one of his allies, Milos. Milos is not being as good as an ally as they could be. And Athens doesn't like this. I believe it comes down to their contributions to the league. But Athens decides they should be punished. So it's kind of an interesting thing on how they should deal with them. So what we have is the Athenian assembly in 2 parts divided over how they should deal with Milos. They eventually settle on sailing out, killing all the men, and enslaving all the women and children. I believe it's recalled once, but then it's sent back out again, and it happens. So it's similar to the Mytilene affair earlier in the century, except
less happy.
It goes through this time. The Melian dialogue is a huge thing in book 4 or 5 of Thucydides. I think it's book 4.
Yeah.
So read that.
And the big thing I said against it is every ally who rebels hereafter, there's a deterrent argument by one side. Everyone who rebels hereafter will be deterred, knowing the consequences. But the opposing argument was everyone will fight to the bitter end against us.
Yeah, and I mean,
no one will surrender. And that's a
Melians...
huge part of ancient warfare. If the other side can put up even a slight resistance, in taking a city, if they don't surrender, it's going to be costly. It's always going to be costly. So there is the being known for destroying cities. Well, great for a villain in a movie. Really makes working through a countryside difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, radicalized moderates. Happens today.
So,
and isn't it the Trojan Women by Euripides that is said to be
Yes, it's the Trojan Women. So Euripides' play, The Trojan Women, is based on this very thing.
Yeah, so this is about Cassandra and
Andromache.
The idea of how to deal with a city.
Dealt with as slaves at the end of the Trojan War.
The men are dead, women and children enslaved.
The children are cast from the walls.
Yeah. So, it's that sort of thing. Athens has kind of almost fallen into their accusations of tyranny, taking it too far. Which, I mean, I think the Allies see, and it's going to come to a head once they kind of fall out of grace a little. But now we get the start of the Sicilian expedition, 415-413. One of the best parts of the Peloponnesian War. Athens' desire to expand westward onto Sicily fails horribly.
Why did they want to go there?
Grain.
Yeah, how did they get tied in? Was it Segestum or Hegesta?
It's Mycenae, which is on the northern coast of Sicily, I'm fairly certain. They asked for help against Syracuse, Syracuse being the main power on Sicily.
Are you sure it's Mycenae? I think you're confusing the Punic War.
Is it Segesta?
I think it's Segesta.
You know what? You're right. It is Segesta. Okay. So the Athenians...
Hegesta, Segestum, or is it Hegeston, Segesta? I forget. I think it's Segestum.
I have a plan. So a smaller city on Sicily asks Athens for help.
It's in Rome Total War, perhaps.
A smaller city, possibly named Segesta on Sicily, asks Athens for help against Syracuse. Syracuse being the huge city-state, which controls most of the island, is causing a lot of problems. Athens, seeing an opportunity to monopolize grain from that region, decides that
cut off crucial trade partner
for Sparta.
Indirectly through Corinth.
Yes. So benefits abound.
There's something poetic about that to me. Don't let me much.
It's a high risk, high reward.
High risk, high reward, exactly. But even Thucydides says of this exposition too, he doesn't think the Athenians understood how big Sicily was.
Yes, this is a common misconception throughout history. Up till the Japanese generals complaining that their superiors did not understand just how massive the U.S. was. This was revealed after the fact that there was basic degrees of confusion where they thought the American country was like the size of the east coast of China.
Yeah. I mean, you see things like that, though, because it's so far away. I mean, relative to how far Japan is from the U.S. now is basically how far Greece is from Sicily. I mean, it's not a huge gap.
Everyone inflates their own countries on the maps, too.
Yeah, but it's huge. It's a huge difference. And what we have is Nicias, our famous peace Nicias, arguing with Alcibiades in the assembly over whether or not they should have an expedition. Nicias doesn't think it's doable. Alcibiades wants it to go ahead. So Alcibiades says, oh, well, you know what, we can do this. And Nicias goes, maybe if we had like 100 more ships trying to talk down everybody. But the assembly is so riled up, they go, yeah, we need 100 more ships. Let's do it. So his plan backfires on him big time. And the Athenians put everything into this massive expedition against Syracuse. And they appoint 3 leaders. Nicias,
one problem.
Alcibiades. And Lamachus is the 3rd leader. He's
Nicias was the cautious one. Lamachus was the one who wanted to go straight for Syracuse, or was that And Alcibiades was the one who wanted to take everything around Syracuse and starve them.
Alcibiades, I think, you could almost...
No, that was Nicias' approach. He wanted to starve them.
Yes.
Lamachus wanted to...
Alcibiades is more aggressive. I mean, you can't say these sorts of things, but there's a decent chance he intended to take the entire island and hold it. Maybe even go into southern Italy. There are a lot of Greeks there already. But in any case... we have the issue on the eve before departure of the expedition, which I know you want to talk more about.
Yes.
The two events, the profanation of the mysteries and the mutilation of the
I do
herbs.
want to talk, and these are inextricably linked to each other. And I actually think that the mutilation of the Herms is a pivotal part in the puzzle of what the mysteries were.
Pivotal part in the puzzle.
That's a good one. So, I mean, the most basic recounting of these events is that Alcibiades is accused of profaning the Eleusinian mysteries.
Everyone is familiar with that.
And he's also accused of going around in Athens with his big party while drunk and chopping off all the penises of the Herms.
Right.
And going around in a party drunk. Yeah,
or komos.
Yeah, komos. It's the revel.
That's not
strange.
strange.
It's the post-sympotic revel. That's not strange.
Yeah.
You're supposed to go to some young woman's house and start just screaming at her for sex.
Yeah, there's a whole genre of poetry based on it.
Yes. Theocritus indulged in it at times.
I mean, you don't attack the Herms. That's the issue here.
Right. So, but let's talk about
transgressing a boundary.
Yeah.
What is talking about? What is profaning the mysteries then? Well, I mean, I'm part of the school of people who think that the Eleusinian mysteries were based on an ergotized rye grain potion. Somehow the priests of Eleusis managed to extract the lysergic alkaloids, which we're familiar with in LSD. So this would be a similar, not the same drug as LSD, which would have been extracted from a grain. This was imbibed ritualistically at the Eleusinian Mysteries after a great process of fasting and rituals and all these different steps of initiation. Well, the theory goes that on the night before the Sicilian expedition, Alcibiades and his buddies got their hands on this stuff and basically just took a whole lot of it and then went around roaming the streets, knocking these penises off the Herms.
There is one thing I think you should look up for just a footnote to add to this part.
Yep.
And that is the word that Thucydides uses for profanation. Because it's profanation comes from the Latin.
Yeah, does he use I know it's an ascibia.
All right.
Ascibe is what he's charged with in the end.
Yeah.
Irreverence.
Yeah, irreverence.
Piety, yeah.
Yeah, so, it's just interesting. Like, the more conservative view, and I'm not supporting it, but the alternative is that he just discussed the rites, or he discussed what happened.
Yeah, because even talking about the Eleusinian
yeah, you're not supposed to talk about it. It's Fight Club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I think it is that, Alcibiades had gone through these rites, of course, as most people in his group had. And, this was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You could only experience the mysteries of Eleusis once. And I think that somebody, a young hotshot like Alcibiades, with all this power, he can get away with doing anything he wants. He's got all the right connections. He makes a couple phone calls, and why can't he do it more than once and with all of his friends? So that's my view on the issue. You can read about that whole ordeal in a book called The Road to Eleusis. The Road to Eleusis has some section about this, but in any case, let's move on.
So I think the problem with the case was that they had a slave reporting that he profaned the mysteries. They didn't have any evidence that it was.
Did they torture him?
I think they did.
They had to.
They had to. Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem was that everything was extremely inconclusive. They couldn't actually come up with any reason that he should be charged with either of these crimes.
Yes, if only for some reason one day court were in session with Alcibiades not there to defend himself, and all his supporters getting paid to row on these ships to Sicily. But he could not be tried in absentia, could he, Mitch?
So, contrary to what you may believe, right after the expedition left, he was tried in absentia. And he's found guilty of Assabeia, which I always remember because in my first year course with Hardiman, he said, it's a reverence to the gods. Don't mistake it for irrelevance to the gods. They're not the same.
That's just understood.
So I know, it's funny. But I've always remembered Assabeia for that reason. But anyway, so what Athens does is they send out one of their flag ships, the Salaminia, after the fleet. The Salaminia catches up to the fleet around...
What's so special about this ship?
It's one of their older ships. I think it was built to celebrate the victory at Salamis. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not Constitution. It goes between states and talks.
Oh,
to them.
it's like an embassy?
like an ambassador ship almost.
Okay.
It's not the word.
A consular ship.
Yeah, kind of.
Consular vessel.
Consular vessel. So its job is to say.
That just sounds like we're reading some very dry Victorian porn.
Yeah. Your boom is like a consular's vessel.
Oh, and I, the diplomat, who rides its shores.
Oh, there's a good word for it. Okay, so the Salaminia was essentially a diplomatic ship that they sent to chase down Alcibiades and bring him back to Athens to answer for his crime. So the way the sailing in the ancient world worked was they'd stick mostly to coasts. So what they did was go up the coast of Greece, then across to Italy, then down the coast of Italy to get to Sicily. They find the shortest gap between
and they're
land
going
masses.
backwards, essentially, because the Mediterranean system is clockwork.
Yeah. They catch up to them in southern Italy. I forget the stop. It might have been Tarentum, but I don't think it was. I forget where they catch them. But anyway, Alcibiades says, okay, sure, I'll go back to Athens. So he gets on the Salaminia, and they start to sail back. So we'll come back to Alcibiades in a minute, but we'll finish with the Sicilian expedition first. So Nicias and Lamachus carry on. They arrive in Sicily. They start their campaign. Lamachus dies. Yeah, like I said, he's basically a footnote, the whole thing. He's the third wheel of the dating relationship of Nicias and Alcibiades.
Of their long and turbulent bromance.
Yeah. So Lamachus dies, and Nicias has to carry on. Nothing goes well. They get trapped in Syracuse.
Their allies can't offer as much support as they said they could.
No support. Eventually, Spartans show up under the general Gylippus.
Who was advising him?
Well, I said we'll get to that.
Okay.
All of the Athenians are captured, Nicias is executed, and it's ended. The Athenians have lost a huge fleet of ships, a huge resource of manpowers, utter failure, they've gained nothing, and the Spartans got to end it. So, going back to Alcibiades...
Wait, is there anything that could have delayed, that might be of interest to people listening to this podcast in particular, that might have delayed the Athenian action on Syracuse?
So Nicias was planning to attack, but then we had a full moon. Nicias wouldn't attack under a full moon.
It was inauspicious.
Yes.
And this time, the Greeks did not yet know what others have figured out by pure logic. Or at least the Greeks of Athens.
Right.
Who were on the near cutting edge.
Yeah.
I guess
the Greeks of Italy were quite on the ball.
They could be too. I don't know how they were at this point, but when you're defending, it doesn't. As long as you both think it's inauspicious to attack, it's usually in your favor. But they didn't know yet that it was just that the moon was not reflecting the light anymore. They thought the moon was losing its own luminescence. That they didn't know it was reflecting the sun.
I mean,
it later turns out that through eclipse, logicians would figure that shit out.
Yeah.
So the other important thing to note about this eclipse in Thucydides is that Thucydides is anything but religious is the wrong word. He's not a very...
He's what Plutarch would call, and Plutarch railed against these people, the atheist historians. Yeah. He's not accusing them of atheism as in not believing in the gods, but in writing the gods out of history.
Yes, this is very much...
Livy, for example, he would be considered an atheist historian.
There isn't much supernatural in Thucydides. So this is
There's
kind of a standout event.
attributed to the belief in the supernatural,
Yes.
cause in human mind.
Yes.
But no external supernatural.
So we do see this episode with the full moon really delaying things. And it did contribute to the Athenian loss.
Amazing.
So, there you go. So, back to...
Well, it wasn't a full moon, it was a lunar eclipse.
Lunar eclipse. Oh, you're right. Sorry, it was a lunar eclipse. I didn't say full moon this whole time. Lunar eclipse. Lunar eclipse. Lunar eclipse. There you go. Back to our dear old friend Alcibiades. He's on the Salaminian back to Athens. Turns out he doesn't want to be convicted.
Well, who does?
Yeah, so what he does is he hops off. Salaminia makes a stop. Alcibiades jumps ship and heads straight to Sparta. Mortal enemies of Athens.
What a dick.
So actually, he had an interesting relation. His father had Xenia. Yeah, he was Athens' almost like consulate in Sparta.
He was a guest friend.
Guest friend, yeah.
Yes,
so,
and kind of he would be the person trusted by the Spartans to.
Yes, exactly.
He even weaseled his way out of the consequences of treachery.
Oh yeah, he is.
Oh, he does this a few more times.
I know.
We're not done
Gets
yet.
all the way to first.
Yeah.
He is the Lizard King.
So we have him showing up and claiming his father's guest friend relationship as a basis for him to get asylum in Sparta. So this is where we see Alcibiades for the next while. As Brett mentioned, he advised King Archidamus or Aegis. He advised the Spartan king...
Archidamus, I think, was dead.
Dead, yeah, King Aegis IV. He advised him to send reinforcements to Sicily, so that's where we get Gylippus and the Spartan force over there. He also advised him to set up a garrison in northern Attica at Decelea, which is a little bit northeast of Athens, which would effectively render any sort of land activity by the Athenians useless. They would kind of harry the fields and get out there, ruin the crops, trap Athens within the walls. So at this time, all of the allies of Athens are rebelling. It's widespread. They can't control them while they're dealing with Sparta so close to home. And we also have the Spartans making deals with Persia. We'll come back to that a little bit, especially towards the end of Lysander. But another thing to be aware of, they're dealing with the East now. Alcibiades, during his asylum in Sparta, is helping with his operations, the Spartan operations in Ionia. But in 412, he had to flee Sparta as well. There's a good reason for that. It involves Aegis's wife.
Did he profane another temple, so to speak?
Yes. He profaned a certain womanly temple who was Aegis's wife, which obviously
the king's wife?
King Aegis didn't like very much. But we know Alcibiades to be a smooth talker, so he did it.
How's that for Xenia?
Yeah, you know the king knew the entire time. He just, once people found out, he had to be like, oh!
Oh, you think he's a cuck?
I think there's an old English word that's no longer... No, there's an old English word that is no longer used that I want to bring back, a wittol, and that is just a contented cuckold. And those people would watch...
a
malcontent cuckold.
No, cuckold?
Yeah, because there's some who are like, I'm a cuckold, and there's others like, yeah.
I thought you had to like it to be
No, that's cuckold porn.
Oh.
And remember, half the time in cuckold porn, they're like, no, you can't like it more than with me. And they just hire like some shitty guy with a small dick, just like, yeah.
I'm a husband.
Ah, she married me.
So Alcibiades is blaspheming some temples all around.
Some queen, yeah. So what he does is he goes back to the Athenian forces in Ionia, and he campaigns with them unofficially. So he's not actually back in Athens yet, but that's coming, because in 407 he's recalled, and he's given the highest office for military affairs in Athens, Strategos Autokrator.
Autocrator?
Yeah.
Oh, he sounds like... He sounds a little autocratic.
Yeah, a little bit. So he's in charge of everything now as far as military goes.
How did he...
You know what? That's the mystery, isn't it?
How did he get out of...
Hackers are usually sniped by the people they hacked to work for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alcibiades!
Not in Steam's case.
Alcibiades
usually
was
it's the hackers who do
so
shit at
interesting,
shows.
even to the Athenians, that he abandoned, that they made him their 5-star general in their time of need against Sparta, who at this
That must have
point,
been real desperate.
dear Sparta, is growing their navy out nicely.
Remember what the consequences of defeat are in an ancient world.
Yeah.
Right.
You have to swallow your pride.
Yeah.
So around this time, a little bit before that, in 411, democracy is overthrown in Athens. We have the installation of the 400 and then subsequently the 5,000, so a group of oligarchs. Democracy is restored only a year later in 510. That's the effect of Alcibiades and his fleet. The other important thing about the year 411 is that this is where Thucydides' narration ends. We have no more Thucydides after 411, which is where we come to rely on Xenophon for...
One great thing, though, about the Hellenicon. Often when a piece of work ends, we don't know why. We don't know whether the author quit writing, the work finished, or we just lost what goes beyond. Mm-hmm. Here it's quite apparent the author quit working. It's not finished, it's quite obvious, there's nothing conclusive at the end. Mm-hmm. On the other hand... Xenophon, yes, explicitly states he's picking up where Thucydides left off.
Yeah. So it might be that Thucydides died around 411.
Or he could have died a decade later.
Yeah, he could have died a decade later. We don't know why he stopped working. But he did stop for one reason or another. And we know that that's where it ends. We're missing books.
We shouldn't assume, for example, that Thucydides was writing at the time.
That's fair.
Because he had to do research. He had to do witness accounts. He had to go through a lot of writing, then publish. I would say that it's unlikely that he was writing anything earlier than a decade.
Yeah.
Within a decade.
Okay. So, but we lost his account. We're just on to Xenophon's account now as our main source for the period.
And sorry, just before moving on, what was Thucydides' stated purpose? Whereas Herodotus has his...
Thucydides' stated purpose was to describe the greatest event, I believe he says, the greatest of human or the greatest war in all of human history through words and deeds. The words and deeds. Brett will remember better than me.
Well, it's not just the words and deeds, but it's more important. It's meant to be didactic. It's supposed to teach those who can read with zeal and a mind to learn what type of things lead to what type of events. This is a very deterministic view of history, cause and effect, and it is really meant to avert future disaster.
Thucydides marks the birth of politique réelle. Yeah. He's really the first one to really look at the world as power politics.
It's not so much popular today, but throughout the 20th century, Thucydides was a very important figure in poli-sci.
Yes.
Political science.
Yeah, he gave birth to the discipline.
I know. He is absolutely invaluable. And while I love the Romans, they never took up the same amount of skepticism and investigation into such events. I mean, Thucydides isn't trying to write an objective truth. He has character arches. He has various things that are contrivances of literature.
And he even tells you that he's like, well, this speech is...
Yeah, they're set pieces. Yeah, this is what they should have said, or this is what they would have said based on what they believed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why I can't trust the speeches.
And I think, too, if you want to go back to your initial comparison of Herodotus and Thucydides, one of the first things Thucydides does is take kind of a pot shot at Herodotus, saying that he's not writing for the pleasure of the reader. Yeah. He's writing to record history. Thucydides' stated objective is to look at history very forensically, very, scientific method comes to mind. He wants to be very precise, and he wants to preserve what he believes is the greatest military action of all time.
I have to just point this out. Where we can't trust his speeches, there is one, many treaties in Thucydides which we've actually found in inscription records. Mm-hmm. And while the preface differs, the body of the inscription, the body of the text is so exact that we managed to... No, not we, but some very intelligent people managed to reconstruct the text by just pasting his
into it, and it lined up on the Stoichodon inscription. A Stoichodon is a graph-shaped inscription, so just because they figured if you put this very treaty in, all the letters would match up. And this hurt the philologist so much.
He just did a squeeze of it?
No, he probably wasn't even the same copy that he'd seen, because this was found elsewhere. There were probably every state would have had their own inscription. But the great thing about it was that this hurt the philologists too, and hurt their esteem a little, which was already falling in the 20th century. But a de that usually gets removed in the earlier critical editions as being spurious, added in by later scribes who didn't know why it should be, who didn't know what it was to do there, or didn't understand the sentence. It was found in this 5th century inscription.
Was it the first word?
No, it was just the second occurrence of it within a sentence.
Oh, okay.
And it's quite obvious it's just a colloquial, like Dan, who is doing this podcast right now and visits here every week, it's that it's that repetition of the subject you'll find in colloquial English. Mm. That's what the second Tao is doing. Mm. And it's just so funny that it was so exact that it even had this supposed error. And it would be seen as bad style, but yeah. These are dork people you're dealing with. You need good style.
So we have Alcibiades back in Athens. So our accounts end. We're on to Xenophon. We see the major Spartan alliance with Persia. We have Lysander. Lysander is one of my favorite characters in Spartan history. He's a general. We don't know his status.
He will sell you potions in Act 2.
He will.
He's also a space marine.
Oh yeah, that's
Warhammer 40.
Yeah. He's a space marine who will sell you potions in Act 2.
There you go.
So,
but
Lysander,
I prefer Farah.
Lysander's a great commander. He brings an end to the Peloponnesian War. I do think he has a big part in that, but we won't go too deep into him. But he's part of the reason that the Spartans are able to really develop their navy. He goes to Cyrus the Younger, and he asks him for money to pay rowers, so he gets that.
And this is just a great example of Persian politics at the same time. These are very wealthy people. Mm-hmm. They are throwing a pittance at a notorious thorn in their side to destabilize it.
Yeah.
This is really working in their favor. You can tell later, especially going into the 4th century, that Persia learned to, until Alexander shows up, play the Greek states against each other. Mm-hmm.
As all good empires would.
No, yeah, Rome did the same thing. It's just Greek historians point to it, but they're not quite as conscious about how manipulated they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see them discuss other places being used such. You see the Romans doing the same thing. But they're never quite as conscientious about it happening to themselves.
Couldn't see the forest for the trees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They saw their own agency while dismissing others.
Well, they are very far away.
Yes.
Geographically.
Yeah.
Tiny little country way off in the east. So now we have Persian gold in Sparta paying the rowers. Sparta has an effective fleet. They're appointing navarchs, of which Lysander's the first, which leads us into a few sea battles, and this is what really leads up to the end of the war. So in 507 or 506, depending on how you want to count it, we have the Battle of Notium.
Notion.
Yeah, Notion, spelled like Notion. We have Alcibiades blockading the Spartan fleet in Ephesus. Alcibiades leaves and tells his commander, whose name is Antiochus, not to do anything. Antiochus doesn't listen. He tries to lure the Spartan fleet out of the harbor. Fails horribly. This failure looks bad on Alcibiades. Alcibiades goes into exile again.
Oh, by the way, talking about
self-imposed this time.
Talking about looking bad because trying to gain glory while the commander's gone. We got to talk about this when we get back to the Romans, because there's a great story about punishment that I love here.
They should make a Hollywood movie about Alcibiades.
They should.
Yeah.
It could be a hit.
You need someone who can play like a Han Solo younger character, like a charming rascal, but far shittier.
Could be an HBO special.
Oh, yeah.
You got some of that sex and drugs, that Orientalism.
Do you know what happens if it becomes an HBO special?
Old Greek rock and
People
roll.
stop going to the lectures in the Greek history course because they don't want to hear spoilers.
Or maybe some people will go and try to get read ahead.
Spoiler culture, man. Spoiler culture.
I don't know, Game of Thrones, a lot of people went out and started reading the books, and
Yeah.
then there were the people who were reading the books decades ago.
I heard from them. I often hear from them that George R.R. Martin doesn't understand how characters work. He just it's like an autistic kid with a bunch of toys just moving from one to the other, mashing things together, as if it's a hurricane of personas. But
yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember enough.
It's no Thucydides.
No. The funny thing is that his history is far more structured than our George R. R. Martin's literature.
Yeah.
Well,
Comedy of words.
so after Alcibiades, after Notion, and Alcibiades goes into his self-imposed exile, which notably is near Cyzicus in the Hellespont. So he's nearby where we're going next.
Oh, good. I was hoping this story would be remembered. Do you think it actually happened? We'll get to it.
We'll get to it. I don't know if we'll talk about the end of his life, but...
No, okay, let's keep going.
So the next major battle we have in 406 is Arginusae. Athens wins this naval battle, but they take huge losses, sort of a Pyrrhic victory. The most important thing to come out of this battle is that 25 Athenian ships were damaged severely in a storm doing their duties. The strategoi, the generals, the navarchs, however you want to call them for this particular episode, did not try to save the men who were drowned.
Well, they were trying to pursue the Spartan fleet.
They tried, they left the men in the water, all these men drowned, they got back to Athens. Athens was not happy. They executed six of the 8 generals.
Wait, before we get to this, why did the first trial not end in prosecution? Because they tried him twice. As Xenophon will tell us, Socrates held up the trial. He refused to hear arguments.
Yes.
He was the judge.
Socrates believed it was an illegal trial.
And so they had to try them again. And that is why many people believe Socrates was executed.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's all just contributing factors.
Yeah. Kind of rolling downhill.
Because what's that got to do with Alcibia and corrupting the youth?
They just try to get him on. You can't get someone on being a bad judge.
You would also argue, though, that just as a side note with Socrates, that they never actually wanted Socrates to die. They just wanted him to admit he was wrong.
Yeah.
Oh no,
he wasn't supposed to drink the hemlock, but he refused to back down.
No, it's not even back down. He didn't even go into exile.
Yeah, he refused to back down. He took the full punishment. He said, "If you're gonna do this, then I'm gonna kill myself, and you're gonna live with it."
It was suicide. In the purest sense, and that's why, Nietzsche hated Socrates so
Especially
much.
That last sentence.
Because he said, I owe a cock to Asclepius.
Oh, what a way to die.
Yeah, to remedy him from the curse of living. And, this is something that we're going to talk about a lot on this series in general.
Agree or disagree, those are great words to go out with. That's like... George Costanza would want to go in that exit.
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, 6 of the 8 generals who were commanding that fleet were executed for failing to save these 25 ships of men. And then we come to the last battle of the Peloponnesian War, the battle at Amphipolis. This is in the Hellespont, so obviously we talked a little bit earlier about how the Athenians have an important line into the Hellespont for grain. They were trying to defend this from the Spartans. The Spartans were across the channel, so Aegis on the north side of the Hellespont. They were at Lampsakos, which is on the south side. Alcibiades was on the island, and Alcibiades went to the Athenians and said, "Hey, look out for these Spartans." And the Athenians said, "Screw off, Alcibiades." So Alcibiades said, "All right, bye," and he walked back to his little hut on the island. The Athenians were caught...
Do you think it was a little hut, or do you think it was his little villa?
I like to imagine it's a little when
you say hut, I imagine him living out after
losing everything else, he just gives up on his decadence and goes into proto-monasticism. But I'm picturing that he has a love shack.
Look at how he's reported to have died by the brothers. It was the brothers, right?
Who?
Alcibiades' death. He was killed by the brothers of some girl he sexed up. Or am I thinking of someone else?
That's very possible.
In any case, that might or not be wrong. I don't remember Alcibiades' death that well. You remember it better than me, probably. You made allusion to it. Or were you talking about something else?
I was talking about the... warning the...
Oh, yeah.
Because... Do you think that actually happened?
I wouldn't put it by Alcibiades. I mean, he...
Did what happen?
Warning the Athenians of
that
the
just
Spartans.
Seems odd that the predecessor would warn his inadequate...
Who tells us?
Xenophon.
The Xenophon.
So it's not as trustworthy.
Xenophon isn't bad. I don't know... Cyropedia is different, but... of course that's not trustworthy. It's an educational tool.
But I mean, Xenophon's he's a soldier. He's not...
Yeah.
He's not Thucydides.
No, he's less skeptical, but he's still intelligent. He's still a philosopher.
Yeah. I mean, it's an episode. It seems like the kind of thing that might be inserted.
I see it as like Scipio and Hannibal meeting up in Anatolia.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to tell. Not impossible, though, because that's where he was supposed to be. I mean, as an Athenian, he kept going back to Athens, so maybe. But I mean, it was all for naught because the Spartans caught them completely unawares while they were messing around in the dark in the night, and the Athenians lost everything.
And this is the beginning of the end.
This is the beginning of the end because the war
So what happened?
moves back to Greece, where Lysander besieges Athens. The Athenians are starving to death. They can't do anything. They surrender in 404.
And this is the worst part, because what happens to surrender, typically?
Well, usually there's some killing. Slavery.
Does the city exist still? Does it get eventually re-inhabited? That's the type of question,
Yeah, and I mean, the typical things don't really happen to Athens. I mean, they have a lot of things imposed on them. They have to take down all the walls. They have to make themselves vulnerable again. The long walls are dismantled. They have to reduce their fleet. They have to give up their empire. These sorts of things. And these are the things we expect.
But why do they do this? Because the Corinthians want them destroyed. A lot of the Spartans want them destroyed.
It might throw off balance with Thebes.
Thebes, and also Sparta was aware of that they and Corinth aren't one.
I mean,
this was Sparta trying to make a client.
Sparta saw, because they installed the oligarchs, the tyranny, the 30, which
favorable to Sparta.
Yeah, which we won't probably get into. But anyway, I mean, the Spartans had to know that it would upset a huge balance if they were to just wipe Athens off the map. And it was within their power to do so, but had they rid themselves of Athens, they'd have to worry about other rising powers.
Yeah, and it was and Lysander especially.
I mean, as happens with all Spartan great generals, is accused of succumbing to wealth. Just like Gylippus, just like Pausanias.
So there's a thought that he was trying to build up an independent power base in Athens of people loyal to him for their lives.
And Lysander, because he's not a king, he's not an Agiator or Euryponte, he can't be a king, but he's looked at as trying to become a king. At least become an equivalent. And because he held so much power after fighting in the Peloponnesian War, I think the kings were a little threatened by him.
Yeah, it's worth noting that the Athenians, through their executions and forcing into exile of failures, really were thinning out their experienced aristocrat pool quickly.
Yes.
Whereas the Spartans made use of this guy who upset their balance.
Yeah, very true. So, I mean, really that's the end. With Sparta, too, I mean, I just mentioned Thebes. It's only another... from 404, 32 years until Leuctra, 33 years, which is where Sparta ends, basically. So Sparta's dwindling quickly, and like you mentioned, they are aware that if they don't keep some sort of control, if they don't leave Attica as a check, then what do they have to
They're still insular too.
Yeah, very much so.
Even when they're trying to be the hegemon of Greece afterwards.
Yeah,
they didn't really
But they fail at it because they're not willing to step outside their bounds still.
Yeah,
they're still acting as Sparta and not as Sparta, the controller of Greece.
They didn't pick up the naval aspect.
No. Their navy kind of peters out.
And they lose the support of Persia, obviously.
Yes.
Which Thebes, I believe, gains for a little?
I'm not sure about that, but
I think the Athenians get, for a while, a fleet rebuilt for them by the Persians, don't they?
Not sure. I actually don't know this intermediate period very well.
Yeah, neither do I. We should look this up afterwards.
I know the pickups of the Sacred Wars.
Yeah, we don't need
Leuctra, those sorts of things. But that's too far in advance. That's just what I know.
I was going to ask you, how do we get from here to Philip?
Philip's where I start again. But I mean, there's the 30 tyrants, and then there's the war between Athens and Thebes and Sparta, which I know. But I don't know what you're asking about. I don't know what happens to Persia in this period. I mean, there's the 10,000 where Xenophon marches, so that's important, the Anabasis. But what else is there? There's the rise of Macedon, which starts 468-ish. 468.
Yeah, Macedon was an influential player. Macedon or the Thracians were each really sought by both sides throughout the war because they were huge forces.
Yeah, well, Thrace belonged to Persia for quite some time.
Yeah, but I'm definitely down when we want to get into the Hellenistic period. We can trounce all over the rise of Macedonia and the successor kingdoms, but this bit, like, what can you really say? It's really...
I like what Porter calls it. He just says he just sees it as a bunch of cocks fighting for the top of a dunghill.
Yeah.
And you know, they're not looking at all the predatory animals just in the distance watching them fight. They're just fighting over this stupid dunghill where they can crow from.
Well, essentially in Athens, what you have is from the installation of the 30 tyrants, they fall, democracy's restored.
They try to build an empire again.
Some
Ionians fall for it again.
Yes, they do that. Then what we have is basically an interchange of the most powerful Greek city.
We should point out one big thing.
What?
The Ionians. What happened to them in the end of the Peloponnesian War?
Oh gosh, great question. The Spartans give them back to Persia.
Yes.
The Spartans give the Ionians back to Persia at the end of the Peloponnesian War.
How did the Ionians feel about that?
They probably didn't matter that... No, they probably didn't care that much.
No.
It's all on the local level.
At the local level, they were probably willing to pay protection money from Athens.
They had good... the Persians wouldn't have been too happy with them for all their revolts, but the Persians probably still treated them
If they didn't resist the Persians coming in or something like that, they could very well have... because everyone likes taking a city without a fight.
Yeah.
And you just put a stronger satrap in there the next time.
Yep. And I mean, it doesn't last, obviously, another 50 years, and we have a little romp through another, 60 years, 70 years. But I mean, the Persians hold on to it.
Yeah, the Persians have kind of a mini renaissance in this period. They really reclaim a lot of things that were lost throughout the 5th century, where they were weak. And they grow in power. They tighten their stranglehold on Egypt. They really consolidate. And if it just wasn't for that really, really, really...
Macedonians.
That Macedonian army. Just the ability to make use of a mix of cavalry and heavy armor.
Yeah.
And it was so capable of making such huge inroads, that supply line.
Yeah, so... I mean, the beginning of the 4th century up to the rise of Macedonia is characterized primarily by shifting power between Thebes, Athens, and Sparta.
Greece is, for the most part, with the exception of mercenaries, in Greece.
Yes.
There is no looking outwards. Syracuse is on the rise and fighting with Carthage.
Yes.
Greek culture as an icon is still as strong as ever.
Oh yeah, the Macedonians are really...
Macedonians are loving it, and they are educating themselves in it.
Well, I mean, and when we talk about the rise of Macedon, we'll talk about Greek culture.
But a lot less of this stuff survives, though, because it is not seen as canonical like a lot of 5th century stuff was.
It's not the classical. It's a slight change.
Demosthenes, for example, is still... Like, a lot of these orators are still highly esteemed.
Yeah.
But that's because the previous century didn't have that.
Okay.
But, yeah, there's just... It is seen as a lesser age, even in its time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say the end of the Greeks, but this is where the Greeks stop entirely being relevant at the rise of Macedon. All right, well, So we might as well finish up to Philip, because there's like 5 more minutes of things to talk about, I feel.
Okay.
So,
Leuctra.
Yeah, that's where we'll go. So the major powers of this time, as you mentioned, are Athens, Sparta, and Thebes. The primary theater, I think, is between Thebes and Sparta. What we have is the wonderful, wonderful generals Epaminondas and Peloponnesias, the Thebans.
Whose side was Corinth on, by the way, here?
Oh, gosh.
They were...
if I know.
They were with the Thebans at times.
Yeah, I mean... The Greece at this time was floppier than a piece of bologna.
After Athens was overwhelmed and defeated, Corinth became antagonistic to Sparta immediately.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough to determine this period. The Spartans have very varied success. Against Thebes, they ultimately fail. We have Peloponnesias is famous for his institution of the Sacred Band, which, for those who don't know, it's 150 pairs of lovers that fight together, and they were extremely effective. They were a very good fighting force, and they lasted all the way until Alexander's cavalry killed them in 338, the Battle of Chaeronea.
Oh, and they got rocked.
Oh. And I'm guessing it was like the Sith system, where there's always a younger and older.
You never know. I mean, I went to the
Theban
monument
too, right,
at
Mitch?
Chaeronea. I insisted we stop there when we drove by Delphi, so I've seen the monument. It's crazy. It's a huge battlefield, but we'll talk about Chaeronea with the Rise of Macedon. So Epaminondas and Peloponnesias are running successful campaigns against the Spartans, and the Spartan numbers are dwindling big time. We talked about this a bit earlier. Spartan Citizen Corps was a very exclusive group. They required a lot of training, so from 8 to 18, something like that, they did the agoge. So their numbers are low, 700, I think, by the time they get to Leuctra.
I think that's the casualties. I think they had like 1,000.
1,000-ish. Anyway, Epaminondas was the supreme general, and I will mention at this time that Philip II was sent to Thebes as a boy.
Alexander's father.
Alexander the Great's father, and he learned from Epaminondas how to war. So just to give you an idea of how good Epaminondas was as a tactician, as a general, all that directly rubbed off onto
He taught the
II.
guy that taught Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
Who taught every other general
and
who would ever come.
I think, the fusion of Macedonian and
Theban
and Greek military customs, that synthesis came around with Philip. It's just Alexander.
Alexander benefited from a huge reform of Philip.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that again.
Yeah.
So Epaminondas, the actions that led up to Leuctra included him marching into the Peloponnese and freeing Mycenae, which was a huge deal.
Yeah, so if you're cheering for Sparta, you are cheering for 80% slave population.
Yeah,
Perhaps more at 90 at this point.
Mycenae is completely off the hook now. The Spartans have lost
Never to be enslaved again.
Never to be enslaved again. Epaminondas freed them. He's marching around the Peloponnese. The Spartans under Cleombrotus march out and meet them at Leuctra in 371, and they're defeated soundly.
This is still under the sad reign of Agesilaus, isn't it? Isn't it Agesilaus who's just the poor guy who gets to see this really dismal period, and by the end of it, he's in exile working as a mercenary in Egypt.
In Egypt.
Oh, it's such a sad story, and I smile because, is still a king.
But so the result of Leuctra is that Sparta has no more manpower. I mean, they pop up, for example, as late as 190s. We have Nabis, king of Sparta. But, I mean, the way Sparta's been a contender for especially the last 100 and a half years, they don't have it in them anymore. Sparta becomes, that backwater southern state that used to be great.
They'll still be influential.
Oh no, I won't argue that.
Tourist destination.
Yeah.
I mean, they were influential in like the wars Rome had in the Peloponnese.
Yeah.
the first Punic War, their mercenaries made a huge difference. Well,
but I mean, especially, I'm not saying that they were completely irrelevant, just that they were severely downgraded.
They were that player in a game who ceased to be a serious contender for a winner and just became a kingmaker.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really the end of Sparta. I mean, you could say Athens benefited from this, but Athens doesn't do too much. I mean, all these states obviously have a huge role to play in the rest of history, but
yeah, the only thing that saved Athens was the venerability of all their work.
Exactly.
It's still got a lot more sackings to go.
No, not necessarily sackings, because as far as culture goes, apparently the House of Pindar was spared in Thebes after Chaeronea.
You could tell it. Go to Thebes today.
Yeah, so everything else was just completely uprooted and destroyed. But there was a lot more love and appreciation towards the Athenians.
What, is Pindar's house like the hottest?
It was the only place saved after Alexander.
Yeah, everything else was burnt and destroyed.
Everything else was burnt and destroyed.
But I mean, in terms of like tourism and stuff.
Oh no, there's a little plaque where Pindar's house was.
Oh, okay.
It's like a little park with a circular walk and a little plaque in the middle with a.
Oh,
it might
cute.
be. I'm trying to remember. It's either a plaque
Pindar
or a bust.
would like that.
But yeah, I mean, the relevance of Greek states take a sharp decline.
Yes.
The rise of Macedon and Philip consolidating everything. Philip fights the Spartans, and we get the famous, "If I come to the Peloponnese, you will lose," and the Spartans say back, "If."
Yeah.
Those sorts of famous things. They're still there. They're just not the juggernauts of the 5th century.
They were deemed not worthwhile because they couldn't actually launch an offensive. But the philosophy of this time changes as well.
Well, and
as the city-state falls, we stop getting this like Plato's Republic style philosophy, a civic philosophy. This new world has a huge influence on the culture going into the Hellenistic period.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk about the Hellenistic period.
All right, well, we'll have to do that some other time.
The old rise of Philly.
Yeah. All right, well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining us. Thanks, Mitch. Thank you, Brett. Well, see you guys next time.